Nebraska Territory, 1867. A woman descends from a rain-soaked stagecoach, her gloved hand clutching a letter bearing an unfamiliar signature. Her eyes scan the desolate landscape, searching for the face of the man whose promises brought her 1,500 miles from Boston. Instead, she finds a flooded valley where a homestead should stand and discovers that destiny has plans far different than the ones she carried westward in her hopes and dreams. The courage to face impossible circumstances, the strength to rebuild from nothing, and the unexpected discovery that sometimes life's greatest blessings come disguised as its most devastating disappointments. This is the story of how two strangers, each bearing their own scars, found healing in the most unlikely place. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. April rains fell in sheets across the Nebraska plains as the twice-weekly stagecoach from Omaha lurched to a halt outside the Willow Creek trading post. The weathered sign, announcing the town's population of 137 souls, hung crooked on its post, the paint peeling away like the broken promises that had brought Eleanor Bennett to this remote outpost. "Willow Creek," shouted the driver, a grizzled man called Harkins, who'd maintained a stony silence for the final day's journey. "End of the line, ma'am." Eleanor pressed a handkerchief to her lips, tasting the grit of prairie dust that had somehow infiltrated the coach despite the downpour. At 25, with amber hair and eyes the color of summer sage, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that masked her inner turmoil. The journey from Boston had consumed 14 days of constant motion, each mile carrying her farther from everything familiar and closer to a future she'd staked her hopes upon. "Is this all of Willow Creek?" she asked, surveying the modest collection of buildings. A general store, what appeared to be a saloon, a small church, and perhaps a dozen scattered structures that comprised the town. Harkins spat into the mud. "Most of it. Floods got the rest." He gestured vaguely eastward. "Rivers up 6 feet above normal. Worst spring deluge in 20 years. Eleanor smoothed the wrinkles from her traveling dress, a practical charcoal wool that had once been stylish in Boston, but now seemed as out of place as she felt. She retrieved her letter from her reticule, the paper worn soft from repeated readings. "I'm to meet Mr. William Garrity. His homestead is—" "Garrity?" Harkins interrupted, his bushy eyebrows drawing together. "Ain't heard that name round here." A chill that had nothing to do with the rain crept along Eleanor's spine. "There must be some mistake. I've been corresponding with Mr. Garrity for nearly a year. He owns a cattle ranch east of town." The stagecoach driver shrugged. "East of town is mostly underwater right now, ma'am, but I don't recall any Garrity with a ranch thereabouts. You might ask Sheriff Daniels or Mrs. Cooper at the general store. They know most everybody for 20 miles. Eleanor's trunk and 2 valises were unloaded from the roof of the coach, and before she could ask further questions, Harkins was climbing back to his seat, eager to reach the next town before nightfall. Within moments, the stagecoach was disappearing around a bend, leaving Eleanor standing alone with her possessions in the thickening mud. "Need some help, miss?" A boy of about 13 approached, eyeing her luggage speculatively. "Yes, thank you," Eleanor said, relieved to see a friendly face. "Is there somewhere I might wait while inquiring about transportation to the Garrity Ranch?" The boy's freckled face screwed up in confusion. "Garrity Ranch? Don't know any Garrity." He scratched his head. "Only ranch east of here that might be standing is the old Miller place, but that's Captain Hayes's land now, and half of it's likely underwater from what folks are saying." Unease blossomed into alarm in Eleanor's chest. "I don't understand. I have a year's worth of letters from Mr. Garrity. He described his property in great detail. Maybe Sheriff Daniels can help," the boy suggested, already hoisting one of her valises. "He keeps track of land claims and such." The sheriff's office was a square wooden structure with a freshly painted sign. Inside, Sheriff Thomas Daniels, looked up from a desk scattered with wanted posters and land notices. "Something I can help you with, ma'am?" he asked, rising to his feet. "I hope so, Sheriff. I'm looking for William Garrity. I was to meet him today upon my arrival." Eleanor fought to keep her voice steady. The sheriff's expression shifted subtly. "And you are?" "Eleanor Bennett. Mr. Garrity and I have been corresponding for the past year. I've come from Boston to—" She hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. "To be his wife." Daniels removed his hat, a gesture that immediately confirmed her growing fears. "Miss Bennett, I'm afraid there's no William Garrity in Willow Creek, or the surrounding county. Not now, and not in the 4 years I've been sheriff." The words struck Eleanor like a physical blow. "That's impossible. I have his letters." She opened her reticule with trembling fingers, withdrawing a packet of correspondence, each envelope bearing the same neat masculine script: William Garrity, Cottonwood Ranch, Willow Creek, Nebraska Territory. Sheriff Daniels examined the letters, his frown deepening. "The handwriting is educated, I'll give you that. But I'm sorry to say you've been deceived, ma'am. But why would anyone—" Eleanor couldn't complete the question. The sheriff sighed. "It happens more than folks talk about. Some men write to Eastern women, spinning tales about prosperous ranches and comfortable lives. They take whatever money the women send for travel expenses, maybe keep up the correspondence long enough to request funds for wedding preparations, then disappear." Eleanor sank into a chair, her mind racing. She had been careful, so careful. She'd insisted on corresponding for nearly a year before agreeing to travel west. Garrity's letters had been consistent, detailed, and seemingly sincere. He'd never directly asked for money, though she had sent funds to cover the wedding preparations 3 months ago. "Was there a Miller ranch that you mentioned might be flooded?" she asked finally. "Yes, ma'am. Joshua Miller's place, about 5 miles east. He died in the war between the states. His nephew held it for a spell, then sold to Captain Hayes last autumn. Hayes was working to restore it when the floods came." The sheriff shook his head. "Rivers breached its banks, something fierce. Whole valley might be underwater." "I see." Eleanor's voice sounded distant to her own ears. "Miss Bennett, the Pioneer Hotel has clean rooms at reasonable rates. I'd suggest you take a day or two to consider your options before the next eastbound stage on Thursday." The implication was clear. Return to Boston, admit defeat, accept that she had been duped by a confidence man who had preyed on her vulnerability. "Thank you, Sheriff. I'll consider it." Outside, the rain had momentarily eased to a drizzle. Eleanor made her way to the Pioneer Hotel, a 2-story wooden structure that appeared to be the most substantial building in town. Inside, she arranged for a room and the storage of her trunk. $1 secured her a small but clean chamber with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the town's main street. Once alone, Eleanor finally allowed herself to absorb the magnitude of her situation. William Garrity didn't exist. The ranch he had described in such loving detail was fictional. The year of correspondence, the plans, the hopes, all built on falsehood. Her inheritance from her aunt, the money that was to have given her independence from her stepfather's household, was half spent on the journey west, and now she was stranded in a frontier town where she knew no one. She unfolded Garrity's last letter, reading it again by the fading daylight. "My dearest Eleanor, as I write this, spring is bringing new life to Cottonwood Ranch. The calves born last month have begun to find their legs, and the cottonwoods that give our home its name are budding with promise. I've completed the improvements to the main house, including the library with floor-to-ceiling shelves that you requested. The bedroom faces east, as you wished, to catch the morning light you so cherish. I count the days until April 15th, when I will finally meet you at the stagecoach. Look for a man in a black hat with a silver band. I'll be the one with the most earnest smile, as I'll finally be welcoming home the woman whose letters have brought such joy to my solitary life. Until then, I remain faithfully yours, William." Details were so specific, so seemingly heartfelt. How could someone fabricate such sincerity? And more practically, what was she to do now? Returning to Boston was the obvious answer, but the thought filled Eleanor with dread. She had left her stepfather's house with no intention of returning. George Bennet had made it abundantly clear after her mother's death that Eleanor was an unwelcome burden, tolerated only because of her mother's modest inheritance, funds that now gave Eleanor her only measure of independence. What Eleanor hadn't told anyone in Boston, what no one knew, was that her inheritance was considerably larger than her stepfather suspected. Her maternal aunt, a shrewd businesswoman who had scandalized Boston society by running a successful import company after her husband's death, had secretly left Eleanor a substantial sum held in trust until her 25th birthday. Eleanor had accessed those funds just before departing for Nebraska, converting a significant portion to banknotes she carried carefully concealed in her belongings. Her plan had been to invest in Garrity's ranch, to be a true partner in building something substantial. Now that dream had evaporated like morning mist, leaving her alone with diminished but still considerable resources and no clear path forward. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. It was the hotel proprietress, a stout woman with kind eyes who introduced herself as Martha Wilson. "Thought you might like some supper, Miss Bennet. We serve meals downstairs, but you looked worn through from your journey." "That's very thoughtful. Thank you." Eleanor accepted the tray of simple but appetizing food: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and a slice of apple pie. Martha lingered in the doorway. "Sheriff Daniels mentioned your situation. I'm real sorry about that. Some men ain't got the decency God gave a rattlesnake." "It seems not." Eleanor managed a small smile. "If you're thinking of heading back east, stage fare's $18 to Omaha, then there's the train from there." $18, a substantial sum, though well within her means. But returning meant facing her stepfather's smug satisfaction, meant admitting defeat, meant surrendering the independence she had fought so hard to secure. "And if I weren't heading east?" Eleanor asked carefully. Martha considered this. "Well, Willow Creek's growing. We get the cattle trade from the south, some mining business from up north. Town needs all sorts of services." "I have some experience with bookkeeping," Eleanor offered. Her aunt had insisted she understand every aspect of the import business. Unusual as that was for a woman. "That's something. Might talk to Harold Cooper at the general store. His wife's been keeping the books, but with a baby coming, she'd welcome the help." Martha smiled encouragingly. "Sleep on it. Things often look different in the morning light." After Martha left, Eleanor ate mechanically, her mind racing with possibilities. She had planned to keep her wealth secret, to ensure William Garrity wanted her for herself, not her inheritance. Now that deception seemed unnecessary rather than prudent. If she stayed, she could build something for herself. If she claimed her full inheritance openly, she could potentially purchase property, establish a business. But would a woman alone be accepted as a business owner in the Nebraska Territory? And how long before word reached Boston and her stepfather, and came looking for what he believed was rightfully his to control? Eleanor stepped to the window, gazing out at Willow Creek as darkness fell. Lanterns were being lit along the main street, casting pools of golden light. The town was smaller than she had imagined, rougher, but there was something appealing in its straightforward nature. No pretense, no rigid social rules to navigate. A decision began to form. She would visit the flooded Miller Ranch, now Hayes' property, tomorrow. She would see for herself the land that William Garrity had described as if it were his own. Perhaps there, among the ruins of one false future, she might find the seeds of a real one. Morning brought clear skies for the first time in weeks, according to Martha Wilson. After a breakfast of flapjacks and coffee in the hotel dining room, Eleanor arranged to hire a horse and wagon to take her to the Hayes property. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Not much to see out there, warned the livery stable owner, a taciturn man named Brooks. Captain's place is half underwater from what I hear. Man just can't catch a break. Nevertheless, I'd like to see it, Eleanor insisted. Your $2. Brooks shrugged, hitching up a sturdy mare to a small wagon. Road might not be passable all the way, rivers still running high. The journey took nearly an hour, following a rutted track that wound through gently rolling hills. Despite her circumstances, Eleanor found herself captivated by the landscape's open beauty, so different from Boston's crowded streets and confined spaces. The vast prairie stretched to the horizon, carpeted with new spring grass and wildflowers that had emerged after the rains. They crested a small rise, and Brooks pointed ahead. There's the Hayes place, what's left of it. The scene below stole Eleanor's breath. A river, swollen far beyond its normal banks, had transformed what should have been a valley into a sprawling lake. Where the ranch house should have stood, only the roof and upper story remained visible, rising from the floodwaters like a sinking ship. Several outbuildings stood on slightly higher ground. A barn with water reaching its lower walls, what appeared to be a bunkhouse, and a workshop of some kind. A small cabin, perhaps for a foreman, stood on a rise just above the floodline, seemingly the only structure completely spared. My God, Eleanor whispered, is Captain Hayes? He's alive, Brooks assured her. Got his hands full trying to save what livestock didn't get swept away. Been sleeping in that cabin yonder. He shook his head. Man fought through the whole war without a scratch, then comes home to get nearly killed at Washita River, only to have his fresh start washed away. Ain't fair how life deals its cards. Could you take me closer? Eleanor asked, her curiosity piqued by both the flooded homestead and its owner's history. Brooks looked doubtful. Road's underwater past that bend. Best I can do is take you to the high ground by that cabin. But Captain Hayes ain't the most sociable sort these days. Might not welcome visitors. I'll take my chances. As they approached, Eleanor could see signs of desperate efforts to salvage what could be saved from the flood. Furniture, tools, and supplies had been stacked on the small rise where the cabin stood. A corral had been hastily constructed, containing a dozen cattle and several horses that had apparently been rescued from drowning. Brooks brought the wagon to a halt at the edge of the dry ground. This is as far as I can go. You want me to wait? Yes, please, Eleanor said. I won't be long. She picked her way carefully along the muddy path toward the cabin. There was no sign of anyone about, though smoke curled from the cabin's chimney. She was about to knock when the door swung open, and Eleanor found herself face to face with Captain Matthew Hayes. Her first impression was of contained power. Tall and broad-shouldered, Hayes moved with the careful precision of a man accustomed to command. His features might have been handsome once, before the war and whatever had happened at Washita River had left their mark. A scar ran from his right temple down his cheek, and his left arm hung slightly awkward at his side. His eyes, a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin, regarded her with surprise that quickly shifted to wariness. "You're a long way from town, ma'am," he said, his voice deep with a rasp that suggested it wasn't often used for casual conversation. "And this isn't the best time for social calls." Eleanor summoned her composure. "Captain Hayes, I apologize for the intrusion. My name is Eleanor Bennett. I arrived in Willow Creek yesterday, expecting to meet someone who had described this property to me in great detail, only to discover that person doesn't exist, and the property was never theirs to describe." Hayes's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps. Mail order arrangement? Heat rose in Eleanor's cheeks, but she nodded. "Yes. Happens more than folks care to admit." He glanced toward the flooded ranch house. though whoever described this place to you either has a vivid imagination or hadn't seen it lately. As you can see, it's more suitable for fish than cattle at the moment." Despite the grim circumstances, Eleanor found herself appreciating his dry humor. The man called himself William Garrity. He wrote about a prosperous cattle ranch with a house that had, among other features, a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. Hayes's mouth twisted in what might have been a smile under different circumstances. Miller was more interested in cattle than books. House had 3 rooms and barely enough shelves for a Bible and an almanac. He studied her with new interest. "You came all the way from Boston." "Boston," he repeated, "based on letters from a man who doesn't exist, to marry him and live in a house that's currently under 6 feet of water." Put that way, Eleanor had. To acknowledge the absurdity of her situation. "It wasn't my most prudent decision." To her surprise, Hayes actually chuckled, a rusty sound, as if rarely used. "Life's rarely prudent, Miss Bennet. Best we can do is stay afloat when the floods come." He gestured toward the wagon where Brooks waited. "Your driver's looking anxious. Flash floods are still a risk with the ground this saturated." Eleanor knew she should leave. This man had troubles enough without adding her predicament to his concerns. Yet something held her in place. Curiosity, perhaps, or the strange sense of connection to this property that William Garrity had inadvertently created through his detailed descriptions of a place he'd never seen. "Captain Hayes," she said suddenly, "I realize this is highly unconventional, but might I make a proposal?" His eyebrows rose slightly, the scar on his temple whitening as his expression changed. "I believe you've had enough proposals from strangers. Miss Bennet, a business proposal," she clarified quickly. "I came west with capital to invest in the future. Those funds are still at my disposal, and your property, despite its current condition, has potential that might be realized with proper resources." Hayes's expression shifted to disbelief. "You're offering to invest in a flooded ranch you've just laid eyes on, owned by a man you've just met." "I'm suggesting a possibility worth discussing once the immediate crisis has passed," Eleanor amended. "I have resources but limited knowledge of frontier life. You have knowledge and a property in need of rehabilitation." He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he shook his head slowly. "Miss Bennet, I appreciate the offer, however, preliminary. But I've learned the hard way to be wary of solutions that appear too convenient." His gaze moved meaningfully to her fine clothing and city manners. "Frontier life breaks more than property. It breaks people who aren't prepared for its challenges." The dismissal stung more than Eleanor expected. "I'm stronger than I appear, Captain Hayes." "No doubt. But this is no place for a Boston lady, right? Now," he nodded toward the wagon, "go back to town. Take the eastbound stage. Find the life you deserve among civilized people." Before Eleanor could respond, a shout came from the direction of the flooded pasture. A young man, little more than a boy, was racing toward them. "Captain, the North levee's giving way." Hayes's entire demeanor changed instantly. The weary, somewhat cynical man vanished, replaced by a commander assessing a crisis. "Get to the horses, Sam. Move the herd to higher ground." He turned to Eleanor, all pretense at social niceties gone. "You need to leave, now." Eleanor didn't argue. She hurried back to the wagon, where Brooks was already turning the horse around, his expression anxious. "Flash flood coming," he explained tersely as he helped her up. "River's changing course. We need to get to higher ground before the roads are gone." As they pulled away, Eleanor looked back. Captain Hayes was already mounting a horse, calling orders to the young man and another worker who had appeared from the barn. Despite his injured arm, he moved with confident efficiency, a man accustomed to crisis. The wagon had barely reached the ridge when Eleanor heard a sound like distant thunder. Looking back, she saw a new surge of water breaching the makeshift. levee spreading across what little dry land remained around the cabin. Hayes and his men were herding cattle and horses up the slope, racing against the rising water. "Will they be all right?" she asked Brooks, who was urging the mare to a faster pace. "Hayes is a survivor," the liveryman said grimly. "Man's been through worse than floodwater." As Willow Creek came into view, Eleanor made a decision. William Garrity's deception had led her to this place, but perhaps that wasn't the end of her journey. Perhaps it was just the beginning of something she couldn't yet imagine. For the first time since discovering the truth, Eleanor felt a strange sense of purpose. Captain Matthew Hayes might not want her help, but the proud, battle-scarred cavalry officer and his drowning ranch represented something authentic in a way that William Garrity's fiction never could. Eleanor Bennett had come west seeking a new life. She was still determined to find it, even if it meant building it from the waterlogged ruins of someone else's broken dreams. Eleanor spent the next 2 days familiarizing herself with Willow Creek. The town was small but determined, its residents displaying a frontier resilience that impressed her. She visited the general store where Martha Wilson had suggested she inquire about bookkeeping work, and found Harold Cooper to be welcoming if cautious. "Never hired a lady bookkeeper before," he admitted, examining the sample of her work. "But these figures are neater than anything I've managed, and Rebecca's in no condition to keep up with it now." His wife's advanced pregnancy had confined her to bed rest. "Can't pay much, $3 a week to start." It wasn't much, but it would extend her resources while she considered her next steps. "That would be acceptable, Mr. Cooper. When shall I begin?" "Monday suit you. I've got a backlog of invoices that need sorting," Eleanor agreed, pleased to have secured at least temporary employment. The arrangement would provide not only income, but a window into the community's dynamics and needs, valuable intelligence if she decided to establish herself permanently. She was returning to the hotel when she noticed a commotion near the livery stable. A wagon had arrived from the direction of the Hayes property, loaded with salvaged items. Captain Hayes himself stood beside it, his tall figure unmistakable even from a distance. He was speaking with Brooks, his expression grim as he gestured toward supplies in the wagon bed. Eleanor hesitated. Their last interaction had ended abruptly with his dismissal of her preliminary business proposal. Yet curiosity and concern propelled her forward. "Captain Hayes," she greeted him, "I'm relieved to see you made it through the additional flooding safely." Hayes turned, surprise briefly crossing his features before his expression settled into carefully neutral lines. "Miss Bennett, still in Willow Creek, I see." "For the moment. I've secured employment with Mr. Cooper at the general store." Something that might have been approval flickered in his eyes. "Practical decision. I tend toward practicality when circumstances allow." She glanced at the wagon's contents, furniture, tools, books, all bearing water damage to some degree. "Were you able to save much?" "Enough." Hayes's tone wasn't encouraging of further questions, but Eleanor persisted. "The cabin, did it survive the second flood?" 6 inches of water inside, but the structure's sound. He studied her with that direct gaze that seemed to evaluate everything it touched. "Why the interest, Miss Bennett?" Eleanor chose her words carefully. "Perhaps because I spent a year imagining a life connected to that property, albeit under false pretenses, or perhaps because I recognize the potential that remains despite current circumstances." Hayes's mouth tightened. "Potential, that's a luxury for those with resources to realize it." "Resources aren't limited to financial capital, Captain," Eleanor countered. "Knowledge, experience, and determination are equally valuable." A sound that might have been a suppressed laugh escaped him. "You've certainly got determination, Miss Bennett. I'll grant you that." Brooks, who had been watching their exchange with poorly concealed interest, cleared his throat. "If you're serious about accommodations, Captain, the old Whitaker cabin at the edge of town is vacant. Nothing fancy, but it's dry." Hayes nodded. "I'll take it. Need somewhere to store what's salvageable and house my men until the waters recede." He glanced at Eleanor. "Good day, Miss Bennet. Best of luck with your new position." The dismissal was polite but firm. Eleanor watched as he organized the unloading of his wagon, directing his 2 workers. The young man she'd seen before, whom she now heard addressed as Sam, and an older man with a pronounced limp who appeared to be the ranch foreman. Despite his injured arm, Hayes worked alongside them, his movements precise and economical. "Man's too proud to ask for help," Brooks muttered beside her. "Lost nearly everything, but he's still thinking about his hand's welfare before his own." "You seem to know him well," Eleanor observed. "Served under him in the 7th Cavalry, different as night and day. Him an educated officer, me just a private. But he treated every man fair. Saved my life at Washita River." Brooks touched his leg. "Got me out when I took an arrow through the thigh. Then he went back for Jenkins and took that saber cut across his face and the bullet in his shoulder." The casual mention of such violence startled Eleanor, though she tried not to show it. "His arm, was that from the same battle?" Brooks shook. His head. "Bullet shattered the bone, healed wrong. Can't raise it above the shoulder now or straighten it proper, but he manages. Captain's stubborn that way." This glimpse into Hayes's past lent a new dimension to the taciturn rancher. Eleanor found herself reassessing her initial impression. Not just a frontier homesteader who'd encountered misfortune, but a man who'd faced extraordinary violence and emerged with wounds both visible and concealed. That evening, unable to settle in her hotel room, Eleanor walked to the town's small church. Not for services. The simple wooden building stood empty in the twilight, but for the perspective its small hill offered. From here she could see the entire town, and beyond it, the distant valley where Hayes's flooded ranch lay. "Miss Bennet, isn't it?" Eleanor turned to find a slender man in clerical attire approaching along the church path. He had a thoughtful face and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Reverend Daniel Taylor," he introduced himself. "I noticed you at services on Sunday." "Yes, I've been attending since my arrival." Eleanor had found the simple service comforting in its familiarity, so different from the ornate ritual of her Boston church, yet sharing the essential elements. "Seeking answers in the sunset?" he asked, joining her at the viewpoint. "Perhaps direction more than answers." "Ah," the Reverend nodded. "I understand you came to marry a man who proved fictional." News traveled quickly in small communities. "Word gets around." "It does indeed, though I suspect there's more to your story than a matrimonial disappointment." His perception was unsettling. "What makes you say that?" "Most women in your situation would have departed on the next eastbound stage. Yet here you are, securing employment, attending services, studying our little community with those observant eyes." His tone held no judgment, merely curiosity. Eleanor found herself unwilling to dissemble with this perceptive man. "I came west, seeking a new beginning. The fact that it won't be the one I anticipated doesn't negate the need for it." "I see." The Reverend seemed to weigh his next words carefully. "And does this new beginning involve Captain Hayes's property?" The question startled her. "Why would you think that? You've been watching the valley since I arrived, and I couldn't help but notice your conversation with the captain earlier today." He smiled gently. "Small towns have many eyes, Miss Bennet," Eleanor sighed. "I made a preliminary business proposal that Captain Hayes firmly rejected. He believes I'm unsuited to frontier challenges." "Matthew Hayes judges people quickly, but not always accurately," Reverend Taylor observed. "His experiences have left him wary of entanglements, financial or otherwise." "You know him well?" "We served together, though I was a chaplain, not a fighting. A man, I witnessed the toll command took on him, especially after Washita." The Reverend's expression sobered. "It wasn't a battle so much as a massacre. Women and children among the dead. Matthew never reconciled himself to his role in it, though he saved as many as he could. The revelation cast Hayes's taciturn nature in a new light. Is that why he left the cavalry? His injuries made continued service impossible, but yes, I believe he sought redemption in creating rather than destroying. Building a ranch, raising cattle, bringing life instead of death. The Reverend gestured toward the distant valley. The flood is more than a material setback for him. It's a spiritual one. Eleanor considered this perspective thoughtfully. Everyone speaks of Captain Hayes's competence and courage, yet he seems isolated. Does he have no family to support him? His parents are deceased. There was a fiancé in Virginia before the war, but when Matthew returned wounded, she had married another. Reverend Taylor studied Eleanor with sudden intensity. May I offer an observation, Miss Bennet? Of course. You and Matthew Hayes have more in common than either of you realizes, both seeking new beginnings, both accustomed to self-reliance, both carrying burdens others can't see. The insight was uncomfortably accurate. Captain Hayes made it clear he doesn't want my involvement in his affairs. What Matthew wants and what he needs are often different matters. The Reverend smiled. Just something to consider as you seek your direction. Their conversation shifted to more general topics: the community's history, the challenges of frontier, ministry, the surprising cultural diversity among Willow Creek's small population. But Eleanor found her thoughts repeatedly returning to Hayes and his flooded ranch. By the time she returned to the hotel, a plan had begun to form, one that would require careful implementation if it were to succeed where her direct approach had failed. Morning found Eleanor at the general store earlier than required for her first day of work. Harold Cooper was surprised but pleased by her promptness. Mrs. Cooper organized most of our system, he explained, showing Eleanor to a small desk in the store's back room. But with spring buyers coming through and the new mining supplies arrived from Omaha, it's gotten away from us. The work was straightforward, if tedious. Eleanor sorted invoices, reconciled accounts, and organized the chaotic ledger into something more manageable. By noon, she had already made significant progress and earned Cooper's undisguised appreciation. You're a godsend, Miss Bennet, he declared. Rebecca's been worrying herself sick over these accounts, which ain't good for her condition. I'm happy to help, Eleanor said sincerely. Then, choosing her words carefully, I noticed Captain Hayes purchased quite a lot of building supplies back in March. Has he settled his account recently? Cooper's expression clouded. Hasn't been in since the flood. Man's got enough troubles. Without me pressing him for payment. Of course. Eleanor kept her tone neutral. I only asked because I'm trying to understand the store's major accounts. Hayes is good for it, Cooper assured her. Always pays his debts, just might take time with everything washed away. The confirmation of Hayes's financial strain strengthened Eleanor's resolve. After completing her day's work, she visited a town's small bank, where she transferred a portion of her funds from banknotes to a local account. The banker, a pinch-faced man named Simmons, made little effort to hide his surprise at a woman managing such transactions independently. Your husband must trust you greatly with his affairs, Miss Bennet, she corrected firmly. The funds are my own, Mr. Simmons. His eyebrows rose nearly to his receding hairline. Indeed, how unusual. Eleanor smiled pleasantly. I find that unusual circumstances often yield the most interesting opportunities, don't you? From the bank, she proceeded to Widow Parker's boarding house, where she had learned many of the town's business was informally conducted. The widow, a formidable woman of 60 who had outlived 3 husbands and managed their combined properties with impressive acumen, received Eleanor in a parlor crowded with mismatched furniture and frontier trophies. So you're the Boston mail-order bride without a groom, the widow said without preamble. Martha Wilson says you've got more backbone than most men around here, staying on after such a disappointment. Mrs. Wilson is kind, Eleanor replied. But I'm here to discuss a business matter. I understand you hold the note on the old Whitaker cabin where Captain Hayes is currently residing. The widow's shrewd eyes narrowed. What's your interest in Matthew Hayes, Miss Bennet? A business interest. I have capital to invest in promising opportunities. And you consider a half-drowned cattle ranch promising? The widow's tone was skeptical. Or is it the man himself you find promising? Eleanor refused to be baited. The property has excellent water access. Ironically, given current circumstances, good grazing land once it dries out, and strategic location between cattle country and the railroad. With proper investment, it could become significantly more valuable. Widow Parker studied Eleanor with new appreciation. You've done your research. I make it a practice to understand investments before committing to them. Smart woman. The widow nodded approvingly. Yes, I hold the Whitaker note. Hayes is paying weekly for the cabin and storage space in my old barn for what he salvaged from the flood. I'd like to purchase that note, along with information on any other outstanding debts Captain Hayes may have in town. The widow's eyebrows shot up. Planning to own the man through his debts doesn't seem your style, Miss Bennet. I have no intention of using financial leverage against Captain Hayes, Eleanor clarified. Quite the opposite. I plan to clear his most pressing obligations so he can focus on rebuilding without immediate financial strain. Anonymously. For the moment, the captain has made it clear he doesn't welcome assistance, particularly mine. Widow Parker chuckled. Man's pride is as sturdy as that stone jaw of his. She considered Eleanor thoughtfully. You know, most women looking to catch a husband go about it with pies and sympathy, not by purchasing his debts. I'm not looking to catch anyone, Mrs. Parker. I'm pursuing a sound business opportunity while helping someone who deserves better than the hand fate has dealt him. The widow's expression suggested she had her own interpretation of Eleanor's motives. Well, I've no objection to selling the note if the price is right. As for Hayes's other obligations, she rose and moved to a small secretary desk. I keep track of who owes what around town. Call it a hobby. By the time Eleanor left the boarding house, she had arranged to purchase not only the Whitaker cabin note, but also Hayes's outstanding accounts at the general store, the blacksmith, and the lumber mill. The total was substantial but not extreme, nearly $300, which would be transferred discreetly over the coming days. Her next stop was the land office, where she reviewed the county records regarding the Hayes property. The title was clear, purchased outright from Joshua Miller's nephew the previous autumn. The water rights were extensively documented, confirming what Eleanor had begun to suspect. The property's greatest value wasn't its grazing capacity, but its control of water access to several surrounding ranches. Armed with this knowledge, Eleanor made one final visit before returning to her hotel room, to Reverend Taylor at the church parsonage. I need advice on helping someone who doesn't want to be helped, she explained after the Reverend invited her in. Matthew Hayes, he surmised. Immediately. Yes, I've learned more about his financial situation, which is precarious, though not yet desperate. I have the means to alleviate some of that pressure, but he's made it abundantly clear he doesn't welcome my involvement. Reverend Taylor considered this thoughtfully. Matthew has carried burdens alone for so long. He's forgotten how to share them. His injuries, the nightmares from Washita, the struggle to build something meaningful, all faced in isolation because he believes connection leads to vulnerability, and vulnerability to pain. Then how do I help without triggering that resistance? Find a way to make your assistance more than charity. Matthew can accept a fair business arrangement, but not what he perceives as pity. The Reverend studied her. May I ask why this matters? So much to you, Miss Bennet. You've only just met the man. It was a question Eleanor had asked herself repeatedly. Perhaps because I understand what it means to build something from nothing, to prove oneself in the face of doubt. She hesitated, then added more softly, or perhaps because, like the captain, I know what it is to face the world alone. Reverend Taylor nodded slowly. Just be careful, Miss Bennet. The waters around Matthew Hayes run deeper and more turbulent than those currently flooding his ranch. The week that followed established patterns that would shape Eleanor's new life in Willow Creek. By day, she managed the general store's books with increasing responsibility as Harold Cooper recognized her aptitude. Evenings were spent at the Yee-Sa Hotel, revising and refining her plans based on new information gleaned about both the community and the Hayes property. She saw Captain Hayes occasionally in town, typically at the livery stable or lumber mill, securing supplies for ongoing salvage efforts. She was careful not to appear too interested, limiting their interactions to polite nods when their paths crossed. Through Brooks and Reverend Taylor, however, she learned that Hayes and his men were making progress, recovering livestock that had survived and beginning repairs on the less damaged outbuildings. On Friday, Eleanor received word from Widow Parker that all the transactions had been completed. Hayes's most pressing debts had been cleared, with the creditors understanding only that an anonymous investor had purchased the notes as part of a larger territorial development strategy. He'll figure it out eventually, the widow warned when Eleanor visited to finalize the paperwork. Matthew's no fool. By then, I hope to have demonstrated the sound business principles behind my actions, Eleanor replied. The widow snorted softly. Business principles. Is that what they're calling it these days? Before Eleanor could protest this interpretation, the parlor door opened and a tall figure entered, Captain Hayes himself, his expression thunderous. Mrs. Parker, I've come to discuss. He stopped abruptly upon seeing Eleanor. Miss Bennet, I didn't realize you were acquainted with the widow. Miss Bennet and I were just concluding some business, Widow Parker said smoothly, gathering the papers on her lap into a folder. Something about territorial development investments, all very proper and Boston-like. Hayes's gaze moved between them, suspicion dawning in his eyes. What kind of investments? Eleanor rose, recognizing that retreat was the wisest course. Nothing that would interest you, Captain. Good day, Mrs. Parker. Thank you for your assistance. She moved toward the door, but Hayes didn't step aside. What have you done? He asked quietly, his voice carrying an edge that hadn't been present. In their previous encounters, Eleanor met his gaze directly. Created an opportunity, Captain, for both of us. I don't want your charity. It isn't charity, it's investment. One that will benefit me as much as you. She squared her shoulders. But this isn't the place for such a discussion. If you wish to hear my proposal, my full proposal, I'll be at the church viewpoint at sunset. Without waiting for his response, she slipped past him and departed, heart racing, not from fear but from anticipation. The confrontation she had both sought and dreaded was finally at hand. Eleanor arrived at the church viewpoint early, giving herself time to compose her thoughts before the crucial conversation ahead. The sun hung low on the horizon, painting the distant floodwaters in shades of gold and crimson. From this vantage point, she could see that the waters had begun to recede, revealing muddy fields where once there had been a lake. She was arranging her thoughts into logical arguments when she heard footsteps on the path behind her. Captain, Hayes approached, his expression still stern but with something else beneath it, curiosity perhaps, or reluctant respect. You've been busy, Miss Bennet, he said without preamble. I believe in efficient use of time, Captain, and money, it seems. Widow Parker wasn't particularly discreet about your investments. My debts to the general store, lumber mill and blacksmith have all mysteriously vanished. Eleanor faced him squarely. I acquired those obligations as part of a larger investment strategy. What strategy could possibly involve the debts of a man whose ranch is half underwater and whose prospects, at best, are uncertain? A strategy based on actual value rather than current appearance. Eleanor gestured toward the distant valley. Your property controls water access to 3 surrounding ranches. The Miller grant includes senior water rights to the entire eastern watershed. That alone makes it valuable, regardless of temporary flooding. Hayes's expression shifted from irritation to surprise. You've done your research. Always. Which is why I now understand exactly what William Garrity was attempting, albeit dishonestly. Eleanor's voice hardened slightly. He recognized the property's strategic value but lacked the means to acquire it legitimately. So he created a fictional identity, courted an Eastern woman with potential resources, and planned to use those resources to secure the property. Yet, knowing you were nearly defrauded, you still want involvement with the same land. The land's value is real, even if Garrity wasn't. And unlike him, I plan to proceed honestly and ethically. She met his gaze directly. I propose a partnership. I will provide capital for immediate rebuilding and livestock replacement. You provide the knowledge and labor to restore the ranch to working condition. We share ownership and profits proportionally. Hayes studied her with those penetrating blue eyes that seemed to detect any hint of deception. Why would a Boston lady choose mud and hardship over comfort and society? There must be easier investments available to someone with your resources. It was the central question, the one Eleanor had asked herself repeatedly. The honest answer surprised even her. Because I don't want it easy, Captain Hayes. I want something meaningful. She gestured toward the town below them. In Boston, I was decorative. A well-bred lady whose value lay in her potential as a suitable wife. Here, I can build something tangible, something that's mine by right of effort, not birth or marriage. Her candor seemed to catch him off guard. He turned away, gazing toward his flood-damaged property. Frontier life is harder than you imagine, he said finally. Brutal winters, isolation, physical demands few Eastern women have faced. I'm prepared to learn what I don't know. And if you find the reality doesn't match your expectations, then I will have failed honestly on my own terms, rather than succeeded by meeting others' limited expectations. Hayes was silent for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. A brief expression that transformed his scarred face and hinted at the man he might have been before war and hardship had marked him. You're either remarkably brave or dangerously naive, Miss Bennet. Perhaps a measure of both, she admitted, but I'm also practical. This proposition benefits us equally. You need capital to rebuild properly before winter. I need knowledge and connection to establish myself in this territory. Hayes considered her words with the careful deliberation she had come to recognize as characteristic. If, and I emphasize if, I were to consider such an arrangement, I would require clear terms, written and legally binding. Hope surged through Eleanor, though she kept her expression measured. Of course, I wouldn't propose a business arrangement without proper documentation. And no charity, he added firmly. Equal effort for proportional. Returns based on investment. I won't be any woman's project or salvation. The statement revealed more about his past wounds than perhaps he intended. Agreed. Partners, not savior and saved. He nodded once, decision apparently made. I'll consider your proposal formally. Draft the terms as you see them, and I'll review them with appropriate amendments. It wasn't full acceptance, but it was progress. I'll have documents prepared by Monday, Eleanor promised. As they walked back toward town in the gathering twilight, Eleanor sensed a subtle shift in their dynamic. Hayes's rigid formality had eased slightly, replaced by thoughtful consideration. How did you come to understand water rights so thoroughly in such a short time? He asked. I visited the land office and examined the property records. The clerk was quite informative once I expressed interest in territorial water law. Hayes raised an eyebrow. Most women wouldn't consider property records stimulating reading material. My aunt believed women should understand the legal foundations of ownership, Eleanor explained. She ran an import business after her husband's death and encountered numerous attempts to undermine her authority through legal technicalities. Your aunt sounds like a formidable woman. She was. Eleanor smiled at the memory. She used to say, "Men make laws assuming women won't read them, prove them wrong at every opportunity." For the first time, Hayes laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise him as much as her. Sound advice for frontier living as well. They parted at the hotel with formal courtesy, but newfound understanding. Eleanor watched him walk toward the Whitaker cabin, his tall figure silhouetted against the last light of day. For the first time since arriving in Willow Creek, she felt truly certain of her course. The weekend passed in a flurry of preparation. Eleanor spent Saturday drafting partnership terms, carefully balancing her financial contribution against Hayes's labor and expertise. She consulted Willow Creek's circuit lawyer, a sharp-minded woman named Abigail Foster, who defied convention by practicing law in the territory. "This is unusually equitable for a business document," Foster observed, reviewing Eleanor's draft. "Most investors would demand controlling interest. I'm interested in sustainable success, not control," Eleanor explained. "Captain Hayes's knowledge is as valuable as my capital in this context." The lawyer's eyes twinkled. "And the captain himself? Is he a factor in this equation?" Eleanor maintained her composure despite the warmth rising in her cheeks. "Our relationship is strictly professional." Foster made a notation on the document. "Well, regardless of motivation, this is a sound agreement. I've made some adjustments to strengthen the mutual commitment and clarify dissolution terms, should they become necessary." Sunday morning found Eleanor in church, seated several pews behind Hayes and his ranch hands. She noted that despite his financial strain, he had contributed to the collection plate, a small but revealing gesture that confirmed her assessment of his character. After services, Reverend Taylor introduced them formally to several prominent townspeople, including the mayor and his wife. The introductions carried symbolic weight. The Reverend was effectively giving his blessing to their potential association, both business and personal. "You've made quite an impression in a short time," Hayes observed as they left the churchyard. "The Reverend doesn't bestow his approval lightly." "We've had several thoughtful conversations," Eleanor replied. "He's helped me understand Willow Creek beyond its obvious characteristics." Hayes nodded, then hesitated before speaking again. "If you're available, I'd like to show you the property properly. The waters have receded enough to access most of it now." The invitation represented significant progress. "I'd appreciate that. When did you have that in mind?" "Tomorrow afternoon. I can have Brooks bring a wagon." "That would be perfect." Monday morning, Eleanor completed her work at the general store with particular efficiency, organizing 2 weeks of backlogged invoices before noon. Harold Cooper was increasingly impressed with her capabilities. "Never seen the books in such fine order," he declared. "Rebecca's feeling better knowing everything's being handled properly." "I'm glad to help," Eleanor said sincerely. "Would it be possible for me to leave early today? I have a business matter to attend to this afternoon." Cooper readily agreed, and by 1 o'clock Eleanor was changing into her most practical dress, a bare, sturdy grey cotton with minimal bustle and sensible boots beneath. She had just descended to the hotel lobby when Brooks arrived with the wagon. "Captain's meeting us at the property," he explained as he helped her aboard. "Had some fencing that couldn't wait." The journey to the Hayes Ranch revealed significant changes from Eleanor's first visit. The floodwaters had receded substantially, leaving behind mud-caked fields and debris tangled in fence lines. Work was already underway. Hayes and his men were rebuilding a section of fencing near what had been the main pasture. Hayes lifted a hand in greeting as they approached, then came to meet the wagon. His shirt was rolled to the elbows, revealing powerful forearms bronzed by the sun. Despite his injured left arm, he moved with the natural grace of a man comfortable with physical labor. "Good afternoon, Miss Bennett," he said, helping her down from the wagon with a strong, calloused hand. "Thank you for coming. I thought you should see exactly what you're proposing to invest in before we finalize any agreements." The thoroughness of his tour impressed Eleanor. He showed her everything, not just the promising aspects, but the significant challenges. The main house would require extensive rebuilding, having stood in 4 feet of water for nearly 2 weeks. The barn needed a new floor and reinforced walls. Fencing throughout the property needed replacement. The flooding actually helped in one respect, Hayes explained, leading her to a ridge overlooking the eastern pasture. It exposed weaknesses in the original water management system. With proper channels and retention ponds, we could better control flow through the property, minimizing future flood damage, while maintaining water access for neighboring ranches. Creating a more reliable water source would increase the property's value to those neighbors, Eleanor observed. Hayes nodded approvingly. Exactly. They currently pay modest access fees, but would likely pay more for guaranteed flow levels, especially during dry seasons. His willingness to include her in strategic thinking represented a significant shift in their dynamic. He was no longer merely tolerating her interest, but engaging with her as a potential partner. As they walked the property, Hayes gradually revealed more of his vision for the ranch. He had extensive plans for breeding quality cattle suited to the territory's specific conditions, rotating pasture use to maintain grass quality, and eventually adding horses to the operation. "The cavalry taught me something about horseflesh," he admitted. "There's a market for well-trained mounts throughout the territory, not just quantity but quality." "You have a comprehensive vision," Eleanor said, genuinely impressed. "I can see why this setback has been so difficult. You were building something significant." "Am building," he corrected firmly. "This flood is a delay, not a defeat." His resilience was remarkable. Despite losing so much, his determination remained unbroken. Eleanor found herself increasingly convinced that her investment would be sound, not just financially, but in terms of the partnership itself. After touring the property's perimeter, Hayes brought her to the small cabin that had survived the flooding, with minimal damage. Inside was spare but meticulously organized, with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn table and chairs, and shelves holding books that had been carefully dried after their rescue from the main house. "The foreman's cabin," Hayes explained. "I've been using it while assessing what can be salvaged from the main house." Eleanor noticed a set of architectural drawings pinned to one wall, detailed plans for rebuilding the ranch house on higher ground with improved structural elements. "Your work?" she asked, examining the precise draftsmanship. "I studied engineering before the war," Hayes explained, a hint of self-consciousness in his tone. "It proved useful in cavalry service and now in civilian life." "These are impressive," Eleanor said sincerely. "You've incorporated drainage systems beneath the foundation, a precaution against future flooding. The original house was built too low in the valley." Eleanor studied the plans, noting practical features combined with unexpected touches of refinement. Large windows positioned to capture morning light, a proper library with built-in shelves, a covered porch wrapping around 3 sides. "This design reflects considerable thought," she observed. "Not just function but comfort." Hayes's expression softened slightly. "A home should be more than mere shelter. That's a lesson military life teaches thoroughly." The comment offered another glimpse into the man behind the reserved exterior, someone who valued beauty and comfort despite his practical nature. Eleanor found herself increasingly intrigued by these contradictions. As they sat at the rough table reviewing her partnership proposal, Hayes raised surprisingly few objections to her terms. His amendments were reasonable. Specific performance requirements on both sides, clear timelines for capital investment and property improvements, and detailed profit distribution mechanisms. "You've been more than fair," he acknowledged, reviewing the final revisions. "Most investors would demand controlling interest, given the property's current condition." "I'm not most investors," Eleanor replied, "and control without knowledge is foolish in this context. Your experience is as valuable as my capital." Hayes studied her for a long moment. "Miss Bennet, Eleanor, I must ask again, are you certain this is what you want? This life will bear little resemblance to Boston society." The use of her given name didn't escape her notice. "I'm certain, Captain Matthew. I came west seeking a new life. This partnership offers exactly the opportunity I hoped to find." Their eyes met across the table, understanding passing between them that transcended business considerations. Then Hayes nodded once, decisive. "Very well, we have an agreement." They formalized it with signatures, and Abigail Foster's legal witness later that afternoon. By sunset, Eleanor Bennet and Matthew Hayes were official business partners in what the document termed Hayes and Bennet Ranch and Water Company. As they stood on the porch of the foreman's cabin, watching the last light fade from the valley, Hayes turned to her with unexpected gravity. "There's something you should know before we proceed further," he said. "The flooding wasn't entirely natural. There's evidence that someone deliberately weakened the northern levee." Eleanor's shock must have shown on her face. "I found tool marks on the remaining structure," he explained. "Someone wanted this property to fail. But who would do such a thing? And why?" Hayes's expression hardened. "That's what we need to discover, because whoever did it likely isn't finished yet." This revelation cast their partnership in an entirely new light. They weren't just rebuilding a flood-damaged ranch. They were potentially facing an adversary determined to see them fail. The knowledge should have frightened Eleanor. Instead, she felt a strange sense of resolve strengthening within her. "Then, we'll face that challenge together as well," she said firmly. Hayes studied her with new appreciation in his gaze. "You continue to surprise me, Eleanor Bennet." "Good," she replied with a small smile. "I believe partnerships thrive on the occasional surprise." As they returned to town in the fading light, Eleanor realized that their agreement had evolved beyond mere business. They were allies now, joined not just by shared economic interests, but by common purpose against an unknown threat. The adventure she had sought by coming west was unfolding in ways she could never have anticipated. And somehow, despite the challenges ahead, she felt more certain than ever that she was exactly where she belonged. News of the partnership between Eleanor Bennet and Captain Matthew Hayes spread through Willow Creek with remarkable speed. By Wednesday morning, everyone from the bank teller to the blacksmith seemed to have an opinion on the arrangement. "Bold move," commented Harold Cooper when Eleanor arrived for her morning bookkeeping work. "Not many would invest in that property after such flooding." "I believe in looking beyond current circumstances to underlying value," Eleanor replied diplomatically. Cooper nodded thoughtfully. "Hayes is a good man, straight as an arrow. If anyone can make that land productive again, it's him." Not everyone shared this positive assessment. Eleanor overheard whispers as she moved through town on her errands. Some curious, others decidedly skeptical. Eastern lady playing at ranching. "Won't last a month when winter comes." "Hayes must be desperate to take female money." She ignored the comments, focusing instead on the practical aspects of their new venture. Her first step was transferring agreed-upon funds to the joint account they had established. The bank manager, George Simmons, made little effort to hide his surprise when she presented the transaction paperwork. "This is most unusual, Miss Bennet. Are you certain you wish to proceed with such significant investment without more established guidance?" "Captain Hayes provides all the guidance necessary for this venture, Mr. Simmons. His knowledge of ranching and territory conditions is extensive." Simmons adjusted his spectacles nervously. "Yes, well, there are other considerations beyond practical knowledge. Standing in the community, business connections, financial stability, all of which our partnership addresses admirably," Eleanor interrupted smoothly. "Now, if you would please complete the transfer as specified." The banker complied reluctantly, his disapproval evident in every measured movement. As Eleanor was preparing to leave, the bank's door opened to admit a distinguished-looking man in his 50s, impeccably dressed in a manner that seemed out of place in the frontier town. "Ah, Mr. Hollister," Simmons called, his tone immediately warming. "Perfect timing. Allow me to introduce Miss Eleanor Bennet, recently arrived from Boston. Miss Bennet, this is Theodore Hollister, president of the Territorial Development Company." Hollister approached with practiced charm, extending his hand. "Miss Bennet, a pleasure. We don't often see Eastern refinement in our humble territory." "Mr. Hollister." Eleanor accepted his handshake with polite reserve, noting the assessing quality of his gaze, similar to how her stepfather had evaluated potential business acquisitions. "I understand you formed some manner of arrangement with Captain Hayes regarding his unfortunate property," Hollister continued. "Most enterprising of you." The comment carried an undercurrent that Eleanor couldn't quite identify. Not quite condescension, not quite threat, but something hovering between the two. "Business partnerships are common in developing territories, I believe," she replied neutrally. "Indeed, though some ventures offer better prospects than others." Hollister's smile remained fixed. "My company has extensive interests in Nebraska's development, railroads, water rights, town planning. Should you ever seek more substantial investment opportunities, I'd be delighted to discuss them." "Thank you for the offer, Mr. Hollister. For now, I'm quite satisfied with my current arrangements." "Of course." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Though circumstances do change, especially in frontier settings. Best to maintain flexibility." The exchange left Eleanor unsettled, though she maintained her composed exterior until she had completed her business and departed. Outside, she nearly collided with Hayes, who was emerging from the saddle shop across the street. "You've met Hollister," he observed, noting her expression. "Just now at the bank, he seems interested in our partnership." Hayes's mouth tightened. "Hollister's interested in anything he doesn't control. His development company has been buying water rights throughout the territory. He offered to purchase my property twice before the flood, at considerably below market value." The information crystallized Eleanor's vague discomfort into specific concern. "Do you think he could be connected to the levee tampering?" "It's crossed my mind," Hayes admitted, lowering his voice. "He certainly benefits from my difficulties, but it's a serious accusation without proof." They moved away from the main street, continuing their conversation with greater privacy as they walked toward the general store. "What do you know about him?" Eleanor asked. "Former railroad man, made his fortune in land speculation back east, then brought his capital west after the war. He controls most of the new rail spur construction and has significant influence with territorial officials." Hayes's expression was grim. "Not a man to cross without considerable resources and allies." Eleanor absorbed this assessment, mentally cataloguing Hollister as a potential adversary. "Then we should focus on securing additional allies of our own." "My thoughts exactly." Hayes gestured toward the general store. "I need to place orders for rebuilding supplies. Care to accompany me? Cooper respects your business acumen." The invitation, natural and collegial, reflected their rapidly evolving partnership. Eleanor found herself appreciating the ease with which Hayes included her in practical matters, treating her neither as a delicate flower nor as merely a source of capital. Inside the store, they reviewed lumber requirements and hardware necessities for the initial rebuilding phase. Eleanor's careful accounting and Hayes's practical knowledge complemented each other efficiently, impressing Cooper with their organized approach. "You two work well together," the storekeeper observed as he totaled their substantial order. "Like you've been partners for years instead of days." Before either could respond, the store door opened, admitting an elegantly dressed woman whose fashionable attire seemed jarringly out of place in the frontier setting. She surveyed the store with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to assessing social situations quickly, her gaze lingering on Hayes before shifting to Eleanor. "Matthew, what a delightful surprise," she said, moving toward them with graceful confidence. "I heard you were in town today." Hayes straightened, his expression carefully neutral. "Miss Hollister, I didn't realize you had returned from St. Louis." "Father sent for me once he decided to make Willow Creek his base of operations." Her smile practiced perfection. "The territorial legislature has appointed him to the Water Commission, so we'll be staying indefinitely." The family connection to Theodore Hollister was immediately evident, not just in her name, but in the assessing quality of her gaze. Beautiful, but calculating, like a chess player evaluating potential moves. "Miss Bennett," Hayes said formally, "allow me to introduce Miss Victoria Hollister. Miss Hollister, Miss Eleanor Bennett, recently arrived from Boston." "How interesting." Victoria extended a gloved hand. "Another Eastern transplant. Though I maintain connections to civilization through frequent visits, the frontier becomes tedious without occasional refinement." "I find it invigorating," Eleanor replied, meeting the subtle challenge in Victoria's tone, "full of unexpected opportunities." "Yes, I've heard about your arrangement with Captain Hayes." Victoria's perfectly arched eyebrow conveyed volumes of unspoken judgment. "Most entrepreneurial of you." Hayes cleared his throat. "Miss Bennett has shown remarkable business insight regarding territorial development potential." "Has she?" Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Father will be fascinated, I'm sure. In fact, you must both attend our gathering this Saturday evening. We're hosting a small dinner for territorial officials and select local residents. Nothing elaborate, merely 20 or 30 guests." The invitation was clearly strategic rather than social. Eleanor glanced at Hayes, whose expression suggested he recognized the underlying dynamics as well. "Thank you for the invitation," Eleanor said before Hayes could decline. "We would be delighted to attend." Victoria's surprise flickered briefly before her social mask reasserted itself. "Wonderful. 8 o'clock at our residence." The former. "Jenkins' mansion at the north end of town. Father has had it extensively renovated." After she departed in a rustle of expensive silk, Hayes turned to Eleanor with a raised eyebrow. "That was boldly done. The Hollister gathering will be a viper's nest of territorial politics." "Precisely why we should attend," Eleanor replied quietly. "If Hollister opposes our venture, better to understand his methods and allies directly. Besides, these events are where alliances form. We need support beyond Willow Creek if we're facing opposition from someone with his influence." Hayes studied her with new appreciation. "You navigate these waters with remarkable skill for someone recently arrived." "Boston society prepared me. Well, for political maneuvering, if nothing else," Eleanor admitted. "The stakes may differ, but the strategies remain similar." That evening, Eleanor visited Widow Parker to seek her insight regarding the upcoming Hollister gathering. The older woman received her in the now familiar cluttered parlor, offering tea and shrewd counsel in equal measure. "So you've met Victoria," the widow said, pouring steaming liquid into mismatched cups. Ambitious creature, had her eye on several prosperous prospects before settling on Matthew as her primary target. "Target?" Eleanor kept her tone neutral, despite the unexpected stab of something that felt disconcertingly like jealousy. Certainly. Decorated war hero with engineering education and substantial property holdings, including critical water rights. He's quite the matrimonial prize, despite his injuries. The widow's eyes twinkled knowingly. Victoria began her campaign before the floods, sending invitations, appearing whenever he came to town. Matthew remained politely distant, which only increased her determination. And now you've appeared, young, educated, possessing your own resources and forming a partnership that gives you a claim on the very property Victoria covets through her father's ambitions. Widow Parker chuckled softly. You couldn't have designed a more perfect challenge to her aspirations had you intentionally scripted it. Eleanor absorbed this assessment thoughtfully. The Hollisters seem to have considerable influence here. Theodore cultivates power like other men cultivate crops, the widow confirmed. Railroad connections, banking interests, political appointments. He collects them systematically. Victoria serves as his social ambassador, charming and gathering. Intelligence in equal measure. Formidable opponents. Indeed. The widow sipped her tea contemplatively. And now they're hosting you at their showcase residence, where territorial officials will evaluate the newcomer who has aligned herself with the man who stands between Hollister and complete water right control in the eastern county. When you describe it that way, it sounds rather daunting, Eleanor admitted. Good. Widow Parker set down her cup decisively. Being daunted leads to proper preparation. Now, what are you planning to wear? The question was unexpected but practical. Eleanor described her finest dress, a deep burgundy silk with modest bustle and lace trim. The widow shook her head firmly. Too Boston, too understated. You need to establish yourself as Matthew's equal in this gathering, not appear as an Eastern curiosity. She rose with surprising spryness for her age. Come with me. In a back bedroom, Widow Parker opened a cedar chest containing garments from an earlier era. She withdrew an emerald green silk dress with sophisticated styling that somehow managed to bridge Eastern refinement and Western practicality. My daughter's before she moved to San Francisco with that banker husband of hers, the widow explained. She was about your size. This made quite an impression at the territorial governor's reception last year. Eleanor touched the fabric reverently. It's beautiful, but I couldn't possibly— Nonsense. Consider it a loan in service of a worthy cause. The widow's expression softened. Matthew Hayes deserves an ally who can stand her ground in any company. This dress makes a statement without a word being spoken. 2 days later, Eleanor found herself climbing the steps to the Hollister mansion on Hayes's arm, the emerald dress complementing her amber hair and projecting exactly the confident image Widow Parker had intended. Hayes himself looked remarkably distinguished in formal attire that emphasized his military bearing despite his injured arm. You look beautiful, he had said simply when he collected her from the hotel. The straightforward compliment more affecting than elaborate flattery might have been. The Hollister residence proved as impressive as rumored. A 2-story structure, with columned porch and extensive gardens, illuminated by gas lamps that must have required considerable expense to install in the frontier town. Inside, crystal chandeliers and imported furnishings created an atmosphere of transported Eastern luxury. Theodore Hollister greeted them with practiced hospitality, though Eleanor noted how his gaze lingered assessingly on her emerald gown. Miss Bennett, Captain Hayes, welcome to our humble attempt at civilization in the wilderness. Your home is impressive, Eleanor acknowledged, though I find the natural beauty of Nebraska territory equally compelling in its way. How charmingly adaptable of you, Victoria commented, appearing at her father's side in a gown of sapphire blue that undoubtedly represented the latest St. Louis fashion. Most Eastern ladies require considerable time to appreciate frontier, Aesthetic virtues. The subtle competition was immediately established. Eleanor met it with composed confidence, her Boston upbringing providing ample preparation for such social sparring. The gathering included exactly the influential mix Widow Parker had predicted. The county judge, territorial legislators visiting from the capital, wealthy ranchers from surrounding properties, and the railroad administrator responsible for the new spur line planned for the region. Each was strategically cultivated by the Hollisters, with Victoria ensuring conversation groups formed and reformed to their advantage. Eleanor observed these dynamics carefully while maintaining her own social presence with practiced skill. She noted which territorial officials deferred to Hollister and which maintained independence. She registered the subtle tensions between established ranchers and Hollister's development ambitions. Most importantly, she witnessed the community's reaction to Hayes. Respect from the working ranchers, cautious assessment from the politicians, and thinly veiled resentment from Hollister himself whenever Hayes spoke knowledgeably about territorial water management. During dinner, Eleanor found herself seated between the county judge and the territorial water commissioner, a placement that seemed designed to test her knowledge of frontier legal and development issues. She met the challenge with poise, drawing on her research and careful listening to contribute meaningfully to the conversation. Miss Bennett displays remarkable understanding of water right priorities, the commissioner observed, genuine surprise in his tone. Most newcomers require months to grasp these complexities. Miss Bennett has made thorough study of territorial statutes, Hayes commented from across the table. Her insights regarding sustainable development have proven invaluable to our partnership. The comment drew subtle reactions around the table. Raised eyebrows, exchanged glances, and a momentary tightening of Victoria's perfect smile. "How fascinating," Victoria interjected smoothly, "though surely theoretical knowledge differs from practical experience. The recent flooding of Captain Hayes's property demonstrates how unpredictable frontier conditions can be, despite the best planning." "Actually," Eleanor replied calmly, "the flooding highlighted weaknesses in the original water management system. Weaknesses our partnership is now addressing through improved engineering. Captain Hayes's designs incorporate innovative drainage solutions that could benefit multiple properties along the watershed." The Territorial Water Commissioner leaned forward with genuine interest. "I'd be most interested in reviewing these designs, Captain. The Commission is evaluating improved standards for flood mitigation throughout the territory." Before Hayes could respond, Theodore Hollister smoothly redirected the conversation. "Speaking of territorial improvements, Commissioner, I've prepared those development prospectus materials you requested. Perhaps we might review them in my study after dinner." The subtle power struggle continued throughout the evening. Eleanor and Hayes presented a united front, navigating the complex social and political currents with complementary strengths, his direct knowledge and respected military background paired with her social adeptness and quick intelligence. As the gathering concluded, Hollister drew Hayes aside, while Victoria engaged Eleanor in seemingly pleasant conversation. "Your partnership with Captain Hayes is certainly unconventional," Victoria observed, her tone light but her eyes calculating. "One wonders how long such an arrangement might last in these challenging conditions." "Strong foundations withstand significant pressures, Miss Hollister," Eleanor replied. "We're building something designed to endure." Victoria's perfect smile remained fixed, but something hardened in her gaze. "How optimistic! Though in my experience, Eastern transplants often discover the territory holds unexpected hardships that test even the strongest resolve." The comment carried unmistakable warning beneath its social veneer. Before Eleanor could respond, Hayes rejoined them, his expression carefully neutral, though tension was evident in his bearing. "We should take our leave," he said quietly to Eleanor. It's growing late. Their departure was conducted with proper civility, but Eleanor sensed an underlying shift in the evening's dynamics. Once they were in the carriage returning to town, she turned to Hayes inquiringly. Hollister made another offer for the property, he explained, his voice tight with controlled anger, significantly higher than before, with thinly veiled implications about the consequences of refusing. What sort of consequences? The usual frontier pressures, difficulty securing supplies, problems with cattle buyers, complications with water access for neighboring ranches. Hayes's jaw tightened. He also suggested that a woman of your refinement would inevitably tire of frontier hardships and return east, leaving me without capital to complete the necessary improvements. Eleanor's indignation flared. How presumptuous! Indeed. Hayes turned to her, moonlight illuminating his scarred face. Though it raises a question I've been reluctant to ask. What assurance do I have that you won't reconsider when winter comes and conditions grow harsh? The question stung, though Eleanor recognized its legitimacy. The same assurance you offer me, our legal partnership, our mutual investment, and my word. She met his gaze directly. I don't abandon commitments, Matthew. Not when they matter. Something shifted in his expression, doubt giving way to cautious belief. The Hollisters won't make this easy for us. I never expected easy, Eleanor replied, surprising herself with her certainty. But I did expect it to be worthwhile. Nothing about that has changed. As they continued toward town, Eleanor reflected on the evening's revelations. They had confronted Hollister's opposition directly and emerged with a clearer understanding of the challenges ahead. They had also identified potential allies in the territorial commissioner and several neighboring ranchers who resented Hollister's expansionist ambitions. Most significantly, she and Hayes had presented themselves as true partners, each contributing strengths to their shared venture. The foundation they were building extended beyond business into something Eleanor wasn't quite ready to name, but increasingly couldn't deny. The frontier was indeed testing her resolve, just as Victoria had warned, but not in the way the sophisticated saboteur had intended. The test wasn't whether Eleanor would abandon her commitment to Hayes and the ranch, but whether she could acknowledge the deeper connection forming between them amid the external pressures they faced. As Hayes helped her from the carriage at the hotel, his hand lingered on hers slightly longer than necessary. "Thank you for tonight," he said quietly. "You were remarkable." The simple compliment warmed her more than elaborate praise might have. "We make a good team, Captain Hayes." "Indeed we do, Miss Bennet." His rare smile transformed his features. "In the lamplight." "Indeed we do." The weeks following the Hollister gathering brought significant progress to the Hayes-Bennet partnership. With Eleanor's capital and Hayes's direction, reconstruction began in earnest. The barn was completely restored, new fencing installed around critical pastures, and foundation work started for the rebuilt main house. Most importantly, Hayes's innovative water management system took shape, with drainage channels and retention ponds strategically placed to control future flooding. Eleanor divided her time between bookkeeping for Cooper's store and active participation at the ranch. She maintained her room at the hotel, but spent most daylight hours on the property, learning ranch operations with determined focus. Hayes proved a patient teacher, explaining livestock management, grass rotation principles, and water distribution systems. "You're a quick study," he observed one afternoon as they inspected newly constructed drainage channels. "Most experienced ranchers take years to understand watershed dynamics." "I have an excellent instructor," Eleanor replied, noting with satisfaction how naturally they now work together, their initial wariness replaced by genuine collaborative respect. Their personal relationship evolved alongside their business, Partnership. Hayes gradually revealed more of himself, glimpses of the educated, thoughtful man beneath the taciturn exterior. Eleanor found herself increasingly drawn to his quiet strength, principled character, and unexpected moments of dry humor. October brought crisp mornings and golden afternoons, perfect weather for continued construction. The main house progressed steadily, its foundation and frame rising on higher ground beyond potential flood reach. Eleanor took particular interest in this aspect of reconstruction, consulting with Hayes on practical elements while adding refinements that would transform the structure from mere shelter to genuine home. Not everyone viewed their progress favorably. Theodore Hollister's development company suddenly raised freight rates for building materials coming through their rail depot. Lumber deliveries mysteriously arrived damaged or incomplete. The territorial bank, where Hollister held significant influence, began questioning their loan application for additional cattle purchases, despite Eleanor's substantial collateral. "Hollister's testing our resolve," Hayes noted grimly, after their bank appointment had been cancelled for the third time. "Creating obstacles to see if we'll abandon the project." "He underestimates our determination," Eleanor replied, her initial Boston reserve now tempered with frontier pragmatism. "We'll find alternatives," and they did. Widow Parker introduced them to independent freight haulers who bypassed Hollister's rail depot. Neighboring ranchers, increasingly resentful of Hollister's water access fees, offered cattle trading opportunities that didn't require bank financing. Each challenge strengthened their partnership and deepened community connections with others who resisted Hollister's growing control. On a brilliant, late October morning, Eleanor arrived at the property earlier than usual, eager to review plans for the house's interior finishing. She found Hayes already working with Sam, the young ranch hand, measuring timber for window frames. "You're here early," Hayes greeted her, his rare smile warming his features. "Eager to choose wallpaper patterns?" "Practical flooring options, actually," she corrected with an answering smile. "Though I do have some thoughts about the library shelving." They spent a productive hour reviewing interior specifications, their preferences aligning with surprising consistency. Both favored simple, quality materials over ornate decoration, though Eleanor insisted on certain refinements: larger windows for natural light, a proper kitchen with adequate workspace, built-in storage throughout to maximize efficiency. "This will be a home worth returning to after long days," Hayes observed, studying the modified plans. Something in his tone caused Eleanor to look up sharply. "You sound surprised." He was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "I suppose I am. When I purchased this property, I envisioned a functional ranch house, serviceable, practical. This," he gestured to their collaborative design, "this is something more." "Something more substantial," Eleanor suggested. "Something more permanent," he amended, meeting her gaze with unexpected directness. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken significance. Then young Sam appeared at the doorway, breaking the quiet connection. "Captain Hayes." The boy's face was flushed with exertion. "Riders coming. Looks like Sheriff Taylor and some others." Hayes moved immediately to the window, his posture changing almost imperceptibly, the ranch owner giving way to the cavalry officer assessing a potential threat. "4 riders," he noted. "Sheriff, Simmons from the bank, and 2 I don't recognize." He turned to Eleanor, his expression carefully controlled. "Perhaps you should wait inside while I greet them." "We're partners," she reminded him firmly. "I'll stand with you." Something like pride flickered in his eyes before he nodded once. They met the approaching riders at the newly constructed corral fence, presenting a united front. Sheriff Taylor, a weathered man with a perpetually concerned expression, dismounted first. Captain Hayes, "Miss Bennett," he acknowledged them with a touch to his hat brim. "Sorry to disturb your morning, but we've got official business." "What kind of business?" Hayes asked evenly. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "These gentlemen have papers regarding this property. This here's Mr. Collins, attorney representing the Territorial Development Company." One of the unrecognized riders stepped forward, a thin man with precise movements and cold eyes. "Captain Hayes, Miss Bennett, I represent Mr. Theodore Hollister in a matter of some legal urgency." He extracted documents from his saddlebag with flourish. "These papers formally contest your ownership claim to water rights on this property. Mr. Hollister has evidence that the original Miller grant was improperly executed and that senior water rights actually belong to the development company through prior territorial assignment." Hayes accepted the documents with outward calm, though Eleanor noted the tightness around his eyes. "The Miller grant was fully validated when I purchased the property. The water rights are clearly established in county records." "Newly discovered documents suggest otherwise," Collins replied smoothly. "The Territorial Court has granted a temporary injunction prohibiting any further water management construction pending full hearing next month." Eleanor's mind raced. Stopping construction now, with winter approaching, would set their progress back by months, potentially leaving the property vulnerable to spring flooding again. "May I see those papers?" she asked calmly, extending her hand. Collins hesitated before passing them over, his expression suggesting surprise at her involvement. Eleanor reviewed the documents carefully, her aunt's training in business matters, allowing her to quickly identify the critical language. "This injunction applies only to new construction, directly affecting water flow," she noted. "Our current improvements are largely complete, and the house construction doesn't fall under these restrictions at all." Collins's expression tightened. "The intention is to halt all significant development until ownership is clarified." "The intention may be so, but the legal language is specific," Eleanor countered firmly. "We will, of course, comply with the precise terms while preparing our response to these claims." The attorney's surprise at her legal knowledge was poorly concealed. "Mr. Hollister anticipated you might take that position. He authorized me to present an alternative." He withdrew another document. "A purchase offer for the property at current valuation, allowing you both to recover your investments without further complications." Hayes's jaw tightened visibly. "Not interested." "Captain Hayes, Miss Bennett, be reasonable," Simmons from the bank interjected. "Mr. Hollister's offer is more than generous, given the property's troubled history and current legal questions. We find the timing of these newly discovered documents remarkably convenient," Eleanor observed, "appearing just as our improvements demonstrate the property's true potential." Sheriff Taylor shifted uncomfortably. "I'm just here to deliver the papers official like. Court says construction affecting water flow stops until the hearing." "We understand, Sheriff," Hayes said. "We'll comply with the legal requirements while preparing our defense." After the riders departed, Hayes studied the documents with grim focus. "This is Hollister's move. He created enough obstacles to test our commitment, and when we overcame them, he escalated to legal manipulation." "Can he actually claim the water rights?" Eleanor asked. "Not legitimately. The Miller grant is solid. I verified every aspect before purchasing. But territorial courts can be influenced, and Hollister has considerable political connections." Hayes looked toward the partly finished house, calculation in his gaze. "We need to adjust our strategy. Focus on completing the house and essential ranch structures while we fight this legally." Eleanor nodded agreement. "I'll contact Abigail Foster immediately. We'll need comprehensive legal representation." They spent the afternoon reorganizing construction priorities and reviewing resources. Their practical response to crisis reflected the strength of their partnership. No recriminations or panic, just collaborative problem-solving and shared determination. As sunset approached, Eleanor prepared to return to town. Hayes walked her to her horse, his expression troubled. "There's something I haven't told you," he said quietly. something that may be relevant to our situation. Eleanor waited, sensing his struggle with some private burden. During the war. Before. Washita, I served briefly with Theodore Hollister's son, James. Hayes's voice held careful neutrality. He was a junior officer assigned to my company. Inexperienced, overconfident, traits that can be deadly in combat. He paused, the scar on his face seeming more pronounced in the fading light. During a skirmish near Vicksburg, James led a reckless charge against my direct orders. He was killed, along with 3 other men. Understanding dawned. Hollister blames you. He filed a formal complaint questioning my command decisions, suggesting I had deliberately endangered his son. The military investigation cleared me completely, which only increased his resentment. Hayes's gaze met hers directly. I should have told you earlier that our conflict with Hollister might be more personal than business. Would it have changed our partnership? Eleanor asked. It might have given you second thoughts about aligning yourself with someone Hollister specifically resents. Or it might have strengthened my resolve to stand with you against unjust persecution, she countered. We can't know theoretical outcomes, Matthew. We can only address our current reality. His expression softened at her use of his given name. You're remarkably adaptable, Eleanor Bennett. Necessity is an excellent teacher, she replied with a small smile. The following morning brought no respite from their challenges. Eleanor arrived at Cooper's general store to find the proprietor unusually subdued. Something wrong, Mr. Cooper? She asked as she settled at her desk. Cooper glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. Had a visit from Hollister's man yesterday. Said they're considering opening a company store that would supply all the regional ranches at lower prices than independents can manage. Threatening your business, Eleanor concluded. Exactly, and mentioning specifically that supplying your ranch might not be in my long-term interest. Cooper looked genuinely distressed. I've got nothing against you and the captain, quite the opposite, but with a baby coming and Rebecca's health still delicate. I understand completely, Eleanor assured him. You must protect your family first. By midday, similar reports emerged throughout town. The blacksmith, lumber supplier, and feed merchant had all received veiled warnings about doing business with Hayes Bennett Ranch. Hollister was systematically isolating them from essential services. Eleanor sent an urgent message to Hayes, who arrived in town by mid-afternoon, his expression grim as she explained the situation. Textbook intimidation, he said after hearing the details. Hollister's applying pressure to every vulnerable point in our operation. They retreated to Widow Parker's parlor for privacy, the older woman offering both tactical tea and strategic counsel. Hollister's using his territorial connections effectively, she observed, though he's overplayed his hand with the local merchants. Folk here resent outside pressure, even when they must temporarily bend to it. We need supplies and services regardless, Hayes noted practically. Winter's approaching, and the house must be habitable before the first heavy snow. Eleanor had been thinking furiously. What about Council Bluffs? It's within reasonable freighting distance, outside Hollister's immediate influence, and has competition among suppliers. Possible, Hayes acknowledged, though transportation costs would increase significantly. I might have a solution for that, Widow Parker interjected. My late second husband's brother runs a freight operation between Council Bluffs and Fort Kearney, always looking for return trip cargo, could give you favorable rates. This practical alternative lifted their spirits momentarily, but the broader implications remained sobering. Hollister was demonstrating both the reach of his influence and his willingness to use it destructively. As they discussed contingencies, a commotion erupted on the street outside. Voices raised in alarm, running. Footsteps and someone shouting about fire brought them rushing to the window. Smoke billowed from the direction of the hotel, Eleanor's temporary home. They hurried outside to find townspeople already forming a bucket brigade from the town well to the hotel, where flames licked upward from the first floor. Sheriff Taylor, directed the firefighting efforts while hotel guests gathered their rescued belongings in the street. "My room," Eleanor gasped, seeing flames near her second-floor window. "Stay here," Hayes ordered, already moving toward the burning building. "Matthew!" she called after him, but he had disappeared into the smoke. Agonizing minutes passed as the bucket brigade battled the spreading fire. Finally, Hayes emerged, coughing but intact, carrying Eleanor's trunk and valise. "Your belongings," he managed, between coughs, setting them down before her. "Most seems untouched by smoke." Relief flooded her, not for the saved possessions but for his safe return. "You could have been killed," she admonished, examining a burn on his forearm with concern. "Calculated risk," he replied, with typical understatement. "Your documents were too valuable to lose." As they watched the firefighting efforts continue, Sheriff Taylor approached, his expression troubled. "Fire started in the storeroom," he reported. "Martha Wilson says lamp oil was spilled near stacked linens, not her usual practice." "Deliberate," Hayes concluded grimly. "Can't prove anything," the sheriff cautioned, "but timing seems mighty convenient, what with you folks facing troubles." Already, Eleanor's missing room key, discovered absent from her reticule that morning and assumed misplaced, suddenly took on more sinister significance. "This has gone beyond business rivalry," Hayes said quietly as the sheriff moved away. "Hollister's escalating to dangerous tactics. He's trying to drive me away," Eleanor realized. "Destroy my residence, isolate us from supplies, create legal obstacles, all to break our partnership and force you to sell." "And in doing so, he's crossed a line," Hayes replied, grim determination in his voice. "Threatening legal maneuvers is one thing, endangering lives is entirely different." That evening, with Eleanor's hotel room uninhabitable from smoke damage, Widow Parker insisted she take a room at the boarding house. "Proper and respectable, with the added benefit of my shotgun by the door," the widow noted practically. As Eleanor settled her salvaged belongings, a knock at the door revealed Hayes, his expression uncharacteristically uncertain. "I've been thinking," he began without preamble. "These attacks are escalating, and they're increasingly focused on you as the means to break our partnership." "I've reached the same conclusion," Eleanor acknowledged. "Then perhaps," he hesitated, choosing his words carefully, "perhaps you should consider returning east until the situation stabilizes. Your capital is already invested, our partnership legally established. You could monitor from a safe distance while I manage on-site operations." The suggestion, though practically framed, struck Eleanor with unexpected force. "Are you asking me to leave?" "I'm suggesting a tactical retreat for your safety," he clarified, "not abandonment." Eleanor studied him carefully, noting the genuine concern beneath his controlled expression. "And if I refuse this suggestion?" Something shifted in his gaze, worry, giving way to a different emotion entirely. "Then we face Hollister together, with full acknowledgement of the increased risks." "I didn't come west seeking safety, Matthew," she said quietly. "I came seeking purpose and independence. Our partnership provides both. I won't abandon it, or you, because of Hollister's tactics, however dangerous." Hayes's expression transformed, the careful reserve giving way to naked admiration. "You continue to surprise me, Eleanor Bennett." "Good." She smiled despite the gravity of their situation. "Predictability is vastly overrated." His answering smile faded quickly as he returned. "To practical matters. If you're staying, we need to accelerate our counter-strategy. I've been considering a direct approach to the territorial governor, bypassing Hollister's local influence. The water commissioner we met at Hollister's gathering seemed receptive to your engineering innovations," Eleanor recalled. "Could he provide an introduction to the governor?" "Possibly, though we'd need compelling evidence of Hollister's illegal tactics." As they discussed possibilities, a new realization formed between them. They were no longer merely business partners defending a property investment, but allies committed to each other personally as well as professionally. The distinction was unspoken but undeniable. Hovering in the careful way Hayes checked her well-being and the trust with which Eleanor accepted his strategic guidance. Hollister's escalation had forced an unexpected crystallization of their relationship, bringing clarity to feelings that had been developing since their first contentious meeting at the flood-damaged property. The threat had not weakened their connection but strengthened it, revealing its true depth and significance. As Hayes prepared to leave, he paused at the doorway. "Whatever happens next, Eleanor, I want you to know that our partnership, in all its dimensions, has become more valuable to me than the property itself." The simple declaration, characteristic in its straightforward honesty, warmed Eleanor deeply. "For me as well, Matthew." He nodded once, understanding passing between them. Without need for elaborate expression, they were united now in purpose and feeling, facing whatever challenges came next as true partners in every sense. The fire had failed to drive Eleanor away. Hollister's next move would undoubtedly prove more dangerous, and their response would need to be equally bold. The morning after the hotel fire brought unexpected visitors to Widow Parker's boarding house. Eleanor opened her door to find Victoria Hollister standing in the hallway, immaculately dressed despite the early hour. "Miss Bennet." Victoria's perfect smile remained in place, though her eyes were calculating. "I was dismayed to hear about your unfortunate displacement. These frontier establishments have such questionable safety standards." "How kind of you to be concerned," Eleanor replied evenly. "Though I'm curious what brings you to call so early." "A business matter, actually." Victoria glanced meaningfully at the open doorway. "Might we speak privately?" Eleanor hesitated, then gestured to the other woman inside, leaving the door partially open for propriety. Victoria took in the modest surroundings with a subtle grimace before focusing on Eleanor with renewed intensity. "I'll be direct, Miss Bennet. Your situation in Willow Creek has become increasingly precarious. The fire, the supply difficulties, the legal complications regarding water rights." She smoothed her already perfect skirt. "My father believes these challenges might prompt reconsideration of your investment priorities." "Does he?" Eleanor maintained a neutral expression, despite her growing indignation. "Indeed, he's authorized me to offer a new proposition. Full purchase of your partnership interest at 15% above your invested capital, allowing you to return east with profit rather than persistent difficulties." The offer was substantial, financially speaking, but its timing revealed the Hollisters' true character. They had escalated to endangering lives and now sought to capitalize on the fear they'd created. "How interesting that this generous offer follows immediately after someone deliberately set fire to my residence," Eleanor observed. Victoria's expression didn't flicker. "Unfortunate coincidence, though it does highlight the unpredictable dangers of frontier life for an unaccompanied woman." "I'm hardly unaccompanied, Miss Hollister. My partnership with Captain Hayes provides both professional support and personal security." Something hardened in Victoria's gaze. "A temporary arrangement at best. Matthew Hayes has demonstrated admirable resilience, but even he must recognize when circumstances are untenable. My father's company has resources no individual can match, regardless of their partnership arrangements." The implied threat wasn't subtle. Eleanor straightened, abandoning any pretense of social niceties. "Please convey to your father that neither fire nor financial inducement will prompt me to abandon my commitment to the Hayes-Bennett Ranch. Our partnership stands firm against all forms of intimidation." Victoria's perfect composure slipped momentarily, genuine anger flashing in her eyes. "You're making a grave mistake. My father's patience has limits, and he's accustomed to achieving his objectives. Even when those objectives include arson and endangering innocent lives, Eleanor countered. Careful, Miss Bennet. Unfounded accusations can have serious consequences. Victoria moved toward the door, her composure restored. Our offer remains open until tomorrow noon. After that, events will take their natural course. After Victoria's departure, Eleanor immediately went to find Hayes, who was meeting with Abigail Foster at her law office. She recounted the conversation in detail, confirming their suspicions about Hollister's responsibility for the fire. It's still our word against theirs, Foster cautioned. Victoria was careful to maintain plausible deniability. But the timing of their offer is incriminating, Eleanor insisted. Coming immediately after the fire, escalating when intimidation failed. Hayes had remained characteristically quiet during the exchange, but his expression had grown increasingly resolved. We need to change strategies, he said finally. Defensive measures aren't enough against an opponent willing to endanger lives. We need to take direct action. What kind of action? Foster asked cautiously. Something unexpected. Hayes stood, decision apparently made. Eleanor, how quickly can you access additional capital, beyond what you've already invested? The question surprised her. Reasonably quickly through bank drafts. Why? I have an idea that might neutralize Hollister's advantage, but it requires substantial resources and immediate implementation. His eyes held hers steadily. Do you trust me enough to commit further without knowing all details? The question was significant, testing not just their business partnership, but their personal faith in each other. Eleanor considered only briefly before nodding. I trust you completely, Matthew. Whatever resources we need, consider them available. Something powerful passed between them at her unhesitating response. Hayes squeezed her hand briefly before turning to Foster. We'll need legal documentation prepared by this evening, and absolute discretion until everything is in place. The remainder of the day passed in carefully orchestrated activity. Hayes dispatched Sam to neighboring ranches with sealed messages, while Eleanor arranged financial transfers through the Council Bluffs Bank, bypassing Hollister's influence at the local institution. Foster worked steadily on legal documents whose purpose remained confidential even to her assistant. By sunset, Eleanor found herself seated beside Hayes in a wagon, heading toward the territorial capital, a journey that would take most of the night. Are you going to explain our urgent mission? She asked as the lights of Willow Creek faded behind them. Hollister's power comes from two sources, Hayes replied, his expression determined in the fading light. Political connections and control of essential infrastructure, particularly water access and transportation. We can't match his political influence directly, but we can undermine his infrastructure control. He handed her a folded document from his coat. This is a survey map of railroad rights-of-way filed last year. Note this section east of Willow Creek. Eleanor studied it in the dim lantern light. There's an alternate route surveyed but not developed. Exactly. The southern route bypasses Hollister's control point entirely. The Territorial Railroad Commission approved both options but left final route selection to the development company, which Hollister subsequently acquired. Understanding dawned. He deliberately chose the northern route to consolidate his control and suppress competition, Hayes confirmed. But the southern route authorization remains valid if sufficient capital is committed to its development. Eleanor's mind raced with implications. You're proposing we finance the alternate railroad spur, but that would require enormous capital, far beyond my current resources. Not alone, no. Hayes's rare smile appeared briefly. But, combined with other ranches similarly constrained by Hollister's monopoly, that's the purpose of Sam's messages. Today, securing commitments from neighboring operations who would benefit from transportation independence. The boldness of the plan impressed Eleanor deeply. Rather than merely defending against Hollister's attacks, Hayes was proposing to fundamentally alter the power dynamics of the entire region. And the territorial governor? She guessed. That's why we're traveling tonight? Hayes nodded. Governor Wilson has been seeking infrastructure development that benefits multiple constituencies rather than single interests. Our proposal potentially resolves several territorial priorities simultaneously. Through the night, Hayes outlined the details of his strategy. By consolidating commitments from multiple ranches, creating a cooperative transportation authority, and securing territorial endorsement, they could effectively circumvent Hollister's stranglehold on regional commerce. It's audacious, Eleanor acknowledged, but even if successful, it addresses only the transportation aspect of Hollister's control. The water rights litigation remains. The issues are connected, Hayes explained. Hollister's water rights claim depends heavily on territorial administration support. If we demonstrate broader economic benefit from independent water management, his political leverage diminishes significantly. Dawn found them arriving at the territorial capital, weary but determined. Governor Wilson, intrigued by the urgent request for meeting from a decorated former cavalry officer, received them in his office before regular business hours. Captain Hayes, the governor welcomed them, his shrewd eyes taking in their travel-worn appearance. And Miss Bennet, quite the journey you've made. I understand you have a proposal regarding regional development. Hayes presented their case. With military precision, the economic limitations imposed by monopoly control, the practical benefits of their alternate transportation plan, and the broader implications for territorial growth. Eleanor provided financial projections and management structures, her Boston business background lending credibility to their ambitious proposal. The governor listened attentively, asking occasional penetrating questions that revealed his thorough understanding of territorial economics. When they concluded, he studied them thoughtfully. Your proposal has considerable merit, he acknowledged, though Theodore Hollister won't appreciate the competition. Mr. Hollister's methods have extended beyond fair business practice, Eleanor noted carefully, including legal manipulation and potentially more serious transgressions. The governor's expression sharpened. What kind of transgressions? Hayes outlined the pattern of escalating harassment, culminating with the hotel fire and subsequent buyout offer. He presented no direct accusations, but arranged the facts to reveal their disturbing implications. Governor Wilson sighed heavily. I've had other reports suggesting Hollister's overreaching. His political contributions have purchased considerable influence, but not immunity from legitimate scrutiny. He rose, decision apparently made. I'll authorize preliminary approval for your transportation authority and request the Water Commission expedite review of contested rights claims. Both actions fall within my administrative discretion without requiring legislative involvement. As they departed the governor's office with preliminary authorizations in hand, Eleanor felt simultaneous exhaustion and exhilaration. Their bold gamble had secured essential support, though significant challenges remained in implementation. Will it be enough? She asked, as they began the long journey back to Willow Creek. It changes the dynamics fundamentally, Hayes replied. Hollister expected continued isolation and mounting pressure to force capitulation. Instead, we've secured potential independence from his control and territorial scrutiny of his methods. The return journey allowed rare uninterrupted hours together. Despite their fatigue, they talked extensively, not just about strategy and business, but personal histories, hopes, and the future they envisioned for the ranch. The friendship and professional respect that had developed between them deepened into something more profound, though still unspoken directly. They arrived in Willow Creek late the following day to find significant developments in their absence. Widow Parker greeted them with uncharacteristic excitement. You've stirred up the hornet's nest properly, she informed them gleefully. Hollister's been summoning his allies all day, closeted in urgent meetings. Word of your governor's visit, spread faster than gossip after Sunday service. More significantly, Sam returned with written commitments from 8 neighboring ranches pledging support for the Transportation Authority. The collective capital and land contributions made the project viable without overextending Eleanor's resources. We should present the full proposal to Hollister directly, Hayes decided, after reviewing their strengthened position. Not as supplicants, but as equals offering reasonable cooperation rather than destructive competition, Eleanor agreed, recognizing the strategic wisdom of offering Hollister a face-saving alternative to complete defeat. He could participate in the Transportation Authority as a member rather than as the controlling owner. His expertise would be valuable if properly channeled. They dispatched a formal request for a meeting, proposing neutral ground at Reverend Taylor's church office. The response came within hours. Hollister would meet them the following morning. That evening, Eleanor found herself unable to rest, despite her exhaustion. The confrontation ahead would determine not just their business future, but potentially their personal safety, given Hollister's demonstrated willingness to employ dangerous tactics. A knock at her boarding house door revealed Hayes, similarly sleepless. "Despite their journey, I thought you should know," he said without preamble. "Sheriff Taylor received a telegraph from the Territorial Marshal's office. They're sending investigators regarding potential civil rights violations in railroad development practices." "The governor acted quickly," Eleanor observed. "More quickly than anticipated. Hollister will know by morning, which changes our negotiating position significantly." Hayes hesitated, uncharacteristic uncertainty in his expression. "There's something else I need to say before tomorrow's confrontation." Eleanor waited, sensing the importance of whatever he struggled to express. "When I suggested you might return east for safety, you chose to remain, despite clear danger," he began carefully. "That decision, your commitment not just to our business, but to facing whatever came, changed something fundamental for me." He moved closer, his customary reserve giving way to earnest directness. "I've kept people at a distance since the war, convinced that isolation was safer than connection. You've proven that theory wrong repeatedly. Our partnership has become," he searched for adequate words, "essential to me beyond any business consideration." The declaration, though not a formal romantic proposal, carried profound significance. From a man of Hayes's careful restraint, Eleanor felt its weight and meaning with perfect clarity. "Matthew," she responded softly, "when I came west, I sought independence and purpose. I've found both, not despite our partnership, but because of it. Whatever challenges we face, I want to face them together." It was, in its way, as binding as any formal commitment. Hayes's expression transformed with rare vulnerability and hope. "Then regardless of tomorrow's outcome with Hollister, we've already succeeded in what matters most," he said quietly. Morning brought confrontation and resolution in rapid succession. Theodore Hollister arrived at the church office flanked by his attorney and Victoria, whose perfect composure showed subtle cracks of tension. The revelation of territorial investigation clearly had its impact, though Hollister maintained confident authority in his bearing. Hayes presented their transportation authority proposal with careful neutrality, not as challenge, but as regional development benefiting multiple interests, including Hollister's, provided he adjusted his operational approach. This cooperative structure ensures fair access while maintaining profitable operations for all participants, Eleanor explained, presenting the financial projections. "Your expertise would be valuable in implementation, with appropriate protections for all members' interests." Hollister's response was coldly pragmatic. "You've maneuvered effectively, Captain Hayes. The governor's involvement changes calculations significantly, as does territorial investigation into potentially illegal business practices," Hayes noted evenly. The implication hung heavily in the room. Hollister studied them both with calculating assessment before responding. I assume these investigations might proceed differently if regional development cooperation demonstrated good faith efforts toward equitable practices. The territorial administration responds to demonstrated commitment rather than theoretical. Promises, Eleanor replied carefully. After tense negotiation, a framework emerged. Hollister would withdraw his contested water rights claims and participate as an equal member in the Transportation Authority, while Hayes and Eleanor would advocate suspending broader investigation into past practices. Not perfect justice, Hayes acknowledged as they walked back to the ranch afterward, but practical resolution that allows regional development without continued destructive conflict. And distances Hollister from direct confrontation with us, personally, Eleanor added, making further dangerous tactics counterproductive to his interests. The November afternoon was crisp, the valley stretching before them transformed by their efforts over recent months. The ranch house now stood completed, on higher ground, its solid construction promising security through coming winters. The innovative water management system protected against future flooding, while ensuring reliable access for neighboring properties. Most significantly, the partnership that had begun as a practical business arrangement had evolved into something neither had anticipated when Eleanor first arrived in Willow Creek, a deep connection built on mutual respect, shared challenges, and growing affection. Hayes stopped at the rise overlooking their property, turning to face Eleanor with uncharacteristic openness. When you stepped off that stagecoach looking for William Garrity, I saw another Eastern transplant doomed to disappointment by frontier realities, he admitted. I couldn't have been more wrong. We've both defied expectations, Eleanor replied, smiling. The battle-scarred captain and the mail-order bride without a groom, building something neither of us imagined possible. Hayes took her hands in his, all pretense of mere business partnership finally set aside. I don't have Garrity's fictional ranch or his elegant promises. What I have is a flood-damaged property slowly being restored, a complicated history, and profound gratitude that deception brought you to Nebraska, where truth could keep you here. Truth and something more, Eleanor added softly. Much more, he agreed, drawing her closer. As sunset painted the valley in autumn gold, their partnership found its final transformation, from business to personal, from practical arrangement to heartfelt commitment. The journey that had begun with disappointment and deception had led to something authentic and enduring, built on the solid foundation of shared purpose and mutual trust. The mail-order bride who arrived to find a flooded homestead and a battle-scarred cavalry captain had discovered something far more valuable than the fictional promises that brought her west. She had found a genuine partnership that would weather whatever storms the frontier might bring, and a love strong enough to rebuild from ruins, whether created by natural disaster or human deception. As they walked toward their home together, hand in hand, Eleanor reflected that sometimes life's greatest blessings came disguised as its most devastating disappointments. Her greatest journey hadn't been from Boston to Nebraska, but from seeking security through another's promises to finding strength in her own courage, and in the heart of the man who had recognized that courage when others saw only a displaced Eastern lady ill-suited to frontier challenges. The flooded homestead had become the foundation for their shared future, stronger for having been tested by both natural disaster and human malice. What began as desperate adaptation had transformed into deliberate choice to build something meaningful together in this place they now called home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe. And turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.